Greetings, friends. I am Vitaly Portnikov. A week after the start of the Ukrainian operation in the Kursk region of Russia, Vladimir Putin held a meeting on the situation in the border regions. He did not make any personnel changes. He gave the order to expel Ukrainian troops from Russian territory. However, he did not explain how they ended up in this territory so easily, and did not demand any explanations. Many are now comparing the situation in the Kursk region of Russia to the sinking of the Kursk submarine during the first months of Vladimir Putin's tenure as head of the Russian state. Even the president of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, did this, who was still a very young man at the time. What do the situation in the Kursk region and the sinking of the Kursk submarine have in common, besides the geographical name, in the context of the historical events? First of all, the inefficiency of the state. Even then, it was noticeable that the Russian state was unable to respond to one of the biggest disasters in history. The Russian leadership needed time to understand what had happened at the border of Russia. The second common feature is, in fact, Vladimir Putin's own indifference. Actually, when the situation with the Kursk submarine unfolded, Putin didn't even interrupt his vacation, and always got irritated when reminded of his, to put it mildly, inadequate behavior during this terrible disaster. And now, it seems as if Vladimir Putin does not notice the tragedy of the peaceful population in the regions which borders Ukraine. In this tragedy, of course, he himself is primarily to blame. After all, it was he who started the war with Ukraine. It was he who did not close the Russian border with that country. After all, it was he who abandoned his compatriots to their fate, or turned them into refugees, people without property and without life prospects. And those meager handouts that Vladimir Putin directed to those affected by the Ukrainian invasion cannot even be compared to the money he offers to participants in the so-called special military operation in Ukraine. That is, the murder of a Ukrainian is still valued by Vladimir Putin at a much more serious amount than the tragedy that befell the innocent, peaceful residents of the Russian regions. And this is also similar to the Kursk submarine disaster, which happened in the year 2000. Because even then, at that time, Putin showed a remarkable indifference. First of all, in communication with the families of the deceased submariners. Another distinctive element is arrogance. In 2000, Vladimir Putin didn't even consider responding to offers of assistance that came from Western countries at the time. He absolutely didn't respond to any offers from the West. At that time, Russia had completely different relations with Western countries than it does today. Vladimir Putin was perceived as an equal partner and even a potential reformer. That is why many Western countries wanted to help and save the Russian submariners. But for the Kremlin, it was more important to support its own prestige than to save people's lives. And now we see almost the same situation. Official propaganda is downplaying the scale of what is happening in the Kursk region, so that the extent of the Russian leadership's miscalculations does not appear so global. What exactly did Vladimir Putin do after Ukrainian troops entered the Russian Kursk region? Exactly in response to this, first of all, it was decided to implement the so-called counterterrorist operation regime in 3 border regions of Russia: Belgorod, Bryansk, and Kursk. That is, the Kremlin applied the same approach to these 3 regions that was used for the republics of the Russian North Caucasus during the wars in Chechnya. This approach has become a symbol of the powerlessness of citizens living in the territory where the counter-terrorist operation is taking place, and at the same time, a symbol of the omnipotence of officials from the Federal Security Service of Russia. By and large, the counter-terrorist operation was used by Russian security officers and military personnel for personal enrichment, rather than to stabilize the situation in the region. And it seems to me that now the residents of Belgorod, Kursk, and Bryansk regions might find themselves in exactly the same situation. Like the once beloved Russian ruler Tsar Ivan the Terrible, he created a peculiar state within a state, where his closest associates are allowed almost everything, and no legal regime applies. But at the same time, he indeed created another buffer border between Ukraine and Russia. Now, this border will run not only along the state border of the 2 countries, but also along the border of the Belgorod, Kursk, and Bryansk regions with other regions of the Russian Federation. And why is this being done? To contain the flow of undesirable information in order for the residents of the rest of Russia not to have the opportunity to find out what is happening in those regions that border Ukraine, and to contain the spread of information that may seem undesirable to Vladimir Putin and his entourage. Thus, even in a situation where the Russian-Ukrainian border has been breached, Vladimir Putin continues to think not about his own country, but exclusively about his own interests and the need to simplify his own power. He has repeatedly used this war specifically to strengthen his power in the Russian Federation before our eyes. Russia, with its so-called managed democracy, has turned into an authoritarian state. After the occupation and annexation of Crimea, before our eyes, authoritarian Russia has turned into a totalitarian state after the start of Putin's war against Ukraine. And now, as was to be expected, special control zones are emerging in this state. The border regions are indeed becoming a place of omnipotence for the Russian special services. This means that the war, which was supposed to remain on the territory of Ukraine according to Vladimir Putin's plan, has actually come to the territory of Russia itself, and not only with the Ukrainian forces, but also thanks to the actions of the Russian leadership. In the new situation, Putin does not know how to respond to challenges except creating closed zones and territories. His past as a KGB officer dictates exactly this approach to any war. Thank you. Friends, stay on this channel. Subscribe to Bureau Train, Accordion, Science. Channels that help develop this channel and our other products. Good luck to you.